Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to this live stream CPD Continuous Professional Development episode with myself, Patrick O'Shaughnessy at History Chappie, and today I'm joined by a very, very special guest, Mr. Paul Fitzgerald from the University of Leicester. Paul, how are you today, sir?
I'm very well, sir. Very well indeed. Strange times we find ourselves in, but yeah, the sun is shining. It's all good, thank you.
Excellent. Paul, I'd like to thank you on behalf of myself and everyone that's listening. Thank you as the Careers Consultant at the University of Leicester and the University of Leicester, my alma mater, for making this time available to come and speak to us today about your role as a Careers Consultant at the University of Leicester, how students in sixth forms or colleges up and down the country or around the world can prepare for university, and maybe a little bit of what life is like at university and preparing for the world of work thereafter. Does that all sound okay, sir?
Yeah, that sounds very good indeed. I think, as you know, Patrick, sort of higher education has been my world for careers for sort of the last 5 years. But prior to that, spent quite a bit of time in FE and secondary schools, and it's been really interesting seeing obviously both sides of it. So yeah, thank you for the opportunity.
Hey, the pleasure is all ours, Paul. Tell us a little bit about that then. Let's start with you first. Who you are, the job you currently do, where you currently work, and the roles that you've undertaken previously. Let's start with your background. Go for it.
Sure, yeah. I mean, just to kind of put it into context, I guess you'd say I was the classic case of someone who went to university and then had no clue what to do afterwards. And I can honestly say, all the time I was at university, not only did I not have a clue what I wanted to do, I wasn't thinking about it either. Um, and my original career, if you like, was in retail management, which, if I'm really honest, Patrick, I wouldn't say played to my strengths. I wasn't amazing at it, but there were tenuous links, and funnily enough, even now I kind of look back and think, yeah, actually, I can see where I was trying to get to. Um, I worked for a long time in careers in further education, and that was a really kind of interesting time because a lot of that was about preparing students for university, what their choices were, what their worries were. And then, as you know, most recently, sort of the last 5 or 6 years, working in higher education careers, and I've been at, as you say, your old ground, really, Leicester, for the last sort of 3 4 years, working with all disciplines, really, both one-to-one, workshops, all kinds of things I've been able to get involved with, most recently with life sciences and also humanities as well. So it's been a very, very interesting ride, and it's certainly something, as I would say currently, that I really enjoy. It's my bag, if you like.
Okay, then. So on sort of day-to-day basis, what sort of things does a careers consultant or somebody working in a sort of careers department at a university get up to? What does their day-to-day look like, or is every day different?
Well, I guess a bit of both there. Every day is different, but it's really interesting you mentioned that because I would say just in the short time that I've been in higher education, what's expected of a careers consultant or what we're there to help with, if you like, has changed quite a bit. Um, I mean, one of the things that I guess we might talk a little bit more about in a bit, Patrick, would be my role in the last couple of years, alongside seeing students, on a one-to-one basis quite regularly. We've looked to embed career development learning in the curriculum rather than have it outside as a separate thing. So we've done a lot of work with, for example, humanities academics, life sciences academics, to look at their curriculum and see how the career development learning, if you like, can form part of the degree rather than sit outside of it. So that's been quite an interesting journey, and it's shifted things quite rapidly.
Okay, so you're looking to like immerse it, if that's the word, rather than have it as a separate discrete bolt on or something that you do separately. So it's something that's integrated. Okay, Paul.
Yeah,
I mean, I think that chimes nicely with the first question, the first question proper. Obviously, you working in sort of further education. Most people listening, I'm guessing, will be working in schools or colleges.
yeah.
But our fundamental role, I'm guessing, is similar. We want to help the students that we serve. So, what advice, Paul, would you give or offer to a sixth form teacher or a college teacher or a head of sixth form or head of college or someone involved in the post-16 world looking to develop their native careers program or how they educate students about careers and future pathways? Are there any pearls of wisdom or tips that you could offer, Paul?
I think, I mean, it's interesting. I've been out of the loop a little while with FE and schools, but I think one of the sort of general themes that I've sort of come across would be, within a curriculum, within the subject matter, there's almost that window to also bring in the application and the reflection part. If you think about what students are learning within any discipline. The more you can bring in the okay, and what have I learnt about me through doing this, that's really, really excellent preparation, because certainly one of the things that we would say probably on a daily basis to a lot of the students we work with, is we reassure them, or they realize that in terms of the skills that are required to go into whatever career ideas they have, it's not that they don't have the necessary skills, it's that they don't recognize that they've been developing ever since they were in school. So it's almost kind of the putting the brakes on. And if within curriculum, within subjects, as well as the learning taking place, you can give students the opportunity to think about what they've taken from it. So, for example, a lot of stuff within FE, within schools, involves group work, quite rightly, which is great. But it's about also thinking about what did they bring to the group as an individual, what allowing them to reflect on that experience and think, what did I learn about myself? Because that then is really what you take with you. And in essence, Patrick, it's interesting. You mentioned, you referred to it right at the start of this. It's almost CPD before you go into work.
Yeah.
As you know, in any sort of profession you go into now, whether you're talking about appraisals or say continuous professional development, you are required to kind of look at yourself, set your own goals, see how you're improving. And it's almost a kind of, within career development, it's a move to why can't we bring that into education?
Completely understand, Paul. I think that sort of chimes with the next question. Obviously,
Okay.
beginning this process of reflection and getting careers ready or next step ready at the earliest possible time or juncture. So, what could, say, a GCSE or IB middle years program, or someone maybe around the age of like 16 who's not on the cusp of going to university yet, imminently, but it's
Yeah.
sort of on the near horizon. Is there anything that they could potentially do to begin to prepare for either university or their next step in their sort of journey towards the world of work or further studies? Anything you could suggest they could potentially do to get work ready or next step ready?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think the first thing I would say on that is I think we both agree that, as is the case with most students, whether it's sort of particularly sort of year 11, it's that they don't really know where they're going to end up, and that's okay. I think there is still this kind of mythical thing out there that when you are 15, 16, 18, you've got to have your life planned out, your life mapped out, and it's just impossible. If you have ideas, then great. And of course, you're going to explore them, which will sort of lead on to my next point, really. But for a starting point, it would be, if you don't know what you want to do, that is perfectly fine. That is okay. At 15, 16, whatever, you're in a really good place to do what I would then advise, and that's start to explore. And the message I would want to kind of put across is almost to kind of take the pressure off, a bit more of a positive one. The more exploring you can do, there are no real potential ways of closing doors at that stage. I've no doubt at some point today we're going to talk a little bit about the requirements for university and beyond. But certainly one of the points I would like to always illustrate would be that it's very hard to kind of close doors. The more you explore, the more you get involved with whatever it is, it will only open them for you. So if there are subjects you love, immerse yourself in them. I'm thinking about things like options choices and FE choices. You don't have to have a job role in mind. If you are studying well and enjoying what you're studying, then you will naturally develop so much of what is required in the world of work, if you like.
Thank you very, very much, Paul. I'm sure that will put a lot of students and teachers' minds at rest. Just immerse yourself in that which you love, let it become your passion, and then sort of follow that. And it's okay not to know at that early stage. Thank you very much indeed. I think that's really, really sagely advice. Thank you, Paul. Okay, I wouldn't be forgiven if I didn't ask this question, because it's a question I myself am sort of asked a lot, and I think probably all teachers are asked a lot. It might be the $1 million question. It might be like the Holy Grail. There may be no one answer, but I'm sure you can offer some advice,
intrigued
Paul.
now.
Okay, so what are universities looking for in students, Paul? What skills, aptitudes, dispositions, knowledge are universities looking for? Now, I'm guessing it's going to vary between universities and then between courses at universities. But is there anything or any sort of reoccurring themes that you could nudge students towards? What are unis looking for in a nutshell?
Right. Okay. Yes, very much as you say, the $64,000 question. The good news would be, certainly in my experience, in terms of what universities are after, it resonates very, very well with what employers are after. Yes, there is the academic element to university study, which is obviously very important. But in terms of the general kind of holistic skill set and what we're looking for, very, very similar to what employers are after. And in terms of sort of these days, these times we find ourselves in, the things that really spring to mind to me are, it would be I love to learn. There's a real keenness across all sectors that there's a desire to kind of develop and improve people. So it's almost kind of that, almost wanting to learn more, to be curious and to develop yourself. Which by proxy, a lot of students going through the education system will have anyway. And it kind of comes back to my point. If you are immersing yourself in something that you love, you'll want to learn more of it. And that's something that universities really, really look for. It's a big thing. I often say to students who are writing personal statements, it only really needs to cover two things. It's, are you able to do the job or the course of study? But just as importantly, do you want to? Can you evidence your motivations? And if you can evidence that real motivation to learn, that would be a massive thing. Secondly, again, in the age that we live, the ability to adapt and problem solve depending on your circumstances. As we perhaps are aware now, it's unlikely that someone would potentially do the same career or role for a massive length of time. They may, but it's becoming rare. And also in terms of what employers are looking for, it is that ability to kind of adapt to different surroundings, different situations, effectively problem solve. And I think the education system that we have, that you're involved with, it goes a long way to teach these skills. But my question is always, do the students know that? Do they, we used to sort of joke a little bit about what we used to do some activities with first year students where they would go home and either go to the gym, watch Netflix, whatever it may be, but they wouldn't potentially get home and think, wow, actually, I've communicated well today. I solved problems when I was working in that group today, because we don't think like that. So if they're able to think and reflect on their experiences in education and outside of it, to be honest, and actually think about what it's done for them and what their strengths are, and then they're able to articulate that's something that's looked upon very, very favourably. And kind of in line with that, really, the last thing I wanted to sort of mention on that was this idea of reflection. I mean, it's almost a term that gets bandied around a little bit too much, I think. particularly in my world these days. But it is that ability to kind of, whatever experience you've gone through, then think about what you've learned from it, what you do better next time, what strengths and areas for development it kind of illustrated to you, because that's something that you would apply in any situation, whether it's within education or work. And again, it's something that universities and employers are very, very keen on. If I can mention one more thing, Patrick,
Go for it, please do.
It would be amiss if I didn't mention digital literacy. And again, this is something, I mean, I always make the point that my 7-year-old's better on the iPad than I am, but actually these skills are very, very important. If you're aware of things like social media, if you are digitally literate, again, it's something that's so common, it is looked upon very, very favourably.
Thanks for that, Paul. Much appreciated. Some real sagely advice there, and I think a lot of people listening will be very, very pleased that you mentioned some tips for personal statements. So thank you very much for that.
Yes, no problem.
Yeah, a huge part of anyone that works with students at post-16 boils down to that. Okay, then the next step is then, or the next question. Obviously, as educators, we not only want to get our students to university or the world of work or their next post-18 step, but we want them to succeed and thrive when they made it. So what skills do you think, Paul, would a student need to succeed or thrive at university? And how can they begin to nurture or develop those before they get there? So what skills are they going to need to do well at uni? And how can they begin the process of developing those now before they get there?
Okay. Yeah, and you're right to mention that, because it's never never too early for those things. Um, I mean, we talk a lot to our students, and I'm sure it's the case across the board with other institutions, about making the most of your time at university. But you're right. We often do think, okay, but what about in preparation for that? Um, and the things that I would always kind of mention are, be curious would be the first thing. We talk a lot to students about, as you say, you're not closing doors, so it is the time to explore. There's very, very little few roads that you can go down that would kind of lead you to a dead end. I often say to students when I'm working one to one with them, don't be defined by job role, because you and I know, Patrick, there are so many job roles out there that if we tried to name them all today, we'd have no chance.
Indeed, there would be no podcast time left, Paul.
Sorry?
We wouldn't have much of a podcast left after we'd named every single job, I think.
Very much so. We'd still be here tomorrow, I think, and we still wouldn't touch the sides. But yeah, but if you have areas of interest, and you have things that you're genuinely curious about, you can't go wrong by exploring them. And I think the other thing I would mention, that really kind of aligns to that, is, again, I think of occasions when I speak to students one to one. If they're interested in certain areas, there are an abundance of resources online where you can look, and that's okay. And I would always advise to do it, because it gives you a bit of a base, if you like. But from my mind, it pales in comparison to networking and talking to people. I still find it kind of funny that it's frowned upon, that if someone's able to get some work experience or an opportunity somewhere through a family member or a friend. For me, I would see that completely the opposite. I would go for that and take every opportunity, because experience, life experience, if you like, the world of work, whatever it is, you will develop yourself. You'll learn about yourself, and it also looks very good when you make the transition into further education or higher education, because it's a lot of it's what we talked today is about a mindset. If you've got a proactive and curious mindset, and you're willing to go and talk to people, do things, get experience, and you're willing for it to be fairly flexible and keep a variety to it, then you really can't go wrong, because you'll learn about yourself, you'll make important contacts, you'll grow in confidence, and as I say, you really can't go wrong with that then.
I think that's probably quite sterling advice for any student and or teacher. Thank you very much, Paul. Okay, the next question for you then. Let's broaden it out before we come back to university, if we may.
Okay.
Are there any trends, changes, continuities that you've noticed whilst working with students at university that are taking place in the labour market as we speak, or do you see any on the horizon? Obviously, that might be very, very important for students thinking about the next step. We obviously know universities are, particularly expensive. They're not the
Yeah.
cheapest things to attend. So is there anything on the horizon, any trends, changes, continuities that you either experiencing here and now or you see coming in terms of the wider world of work? It may well be different across sectors, and I'm sure it is, but is there anything you could highlight for us?
Yeah, sure. Definitely, as you say, we sort of try and keep our eye on this, and we do liaise regularly with employers to kind of get a sense of what it's like out there, if you like. The big one for me, Patrick, would still be, and I guess it's something that I would want everyone to be aware of, particularly if they were at kind of sixth form or year 10, 11. And that is that when we are dealing with graduate opportunities, when we're looking at job roles, if you like, after you graduate, I would say that probably about 80% of them now, and maybe that's growing, are not discipline specific. You'll find that they will recruit from any degree discipline. So I find again that often students position themselves in their own cul-de-sacs and corners. And I can think of, for example, closer to your world, students who have maybe studied history, English, feel unable to apply for example, management roles or project management roles or human resources roles, but actually those employers are crying out to get more applicants from different disciplines. So the whole thing about a degree leading into a specific job, in a lot of cases, it is simply not the case. I mean, I work with the medical school and also allied health professionals. So yes, if you're looking at being a nurse or a doctor, there's obviously key knowledge that you need there, but that's quite niche. Actually, across the board, what you study doesn't really matter to the employers. They're interested in you going through that process and through learning the knowledge. What skills have you developed? How are you able to apply it? Um, there's so much there that again I would be quite keen for people to be aware of. Does that sort of help a little bit, Patrick?
Massively, thank you very much indeed. I'm particularly interested in the statistic about, the majority of
Yes. Yeah.
jobs actually do not require any sort of domain or discipline specific educational pathway to have been followed. I'm sure that there are some. I'm sure to become a doctor of medicine, you have to have done a
Exactly. Yeah.
medical degree, but I mean that would come in the not 20%, not the 80%. So I think that's
Yeah.
really, really interesting information, and that will be of great use to heads of sixth form, heads of colleges, and people in post-16 education who might not be as familiar with that sort of the trends moving forward. So thank you very much for that, Paul. Okay,
Yeah.
I'm coming towards the end of the questions. Really, but I do
Okay.
have one for you. Um,
Sure.
what what advice would you give to a university student who sort of doesn't know what they want to do next? Or we can broaden that out. What advice would you give to someone working in post-16? A student comes to them and they don't know. The student doesn't know what they want to do next. Is there any way of offering advice and guidance, or any sort of $1 million questions or things to be aware of? So we'll take it as, what advice do you give to a university student who doesn't know what they want to do next? So you can answer that one, and then if you want to, Paul, what advice
On
would
the
you give to
spot.
a teacher or a educational practitioner in post-16 when a student comes to them and they've got no idea about what comes next? Any words of wisdom for us?
Yeah, sure. And I mean, that's, as I'm sure you can appreciate, something that we come across, certainly I do fairly regularly. And I would kind of go back to something that we talked about a little bit earlier to start with, in that that's not a bad thing. If you don't know what you want to do, that doesn't put you on a lower pedestal than someone who thinks they do. Most people don't know what they want to do, so it's perfectly okay. And rather than a negative situation, I would try and get people to turn it on their head, and this is how we attempt to support really, and see it as an opportunity for exploration, because there's plenty that you can explore. And again, I would reiterate what I said earlier, that you don't be defined by job role. you think about what you're good at, what you like, what your values are, what interests you, and also who you can talk to, and just start to explore. Because it may be, as I'm sure is often the case with a lot of us, we don't suddenly have that magic light bulb moment at 15, 16, 18, 21. It can be later, and people explore at different paces and kind of hit on things at different times. But as long as you're proactive and you're trying things and you're doing things, that's the most that you need to be able to do. Because I would also say with that, we're looking here to support students with, as you quite rightly say, what they do next, not what they do forever or what they do for however long, but just purely what they do next. We talk a lot about SMART goals at Leicester, and just thinking, right, okay, I don't know what I want to do, and that's okay, but who could I talk to? What could I do? Just simple things, just to make sure that I'm moving in the right direction and I'm always trying things and doing things. Because anything that you do, anything that you speak to, or any experience that you get, whatever it is, will only enhance your CV, your network. So certainly that sort of proactive approach. So it's only about what next. It's perfectly okay. It's an opportunity for exploration. They would be sort of my first two things there.
Thanks, Paul. I've got a question from a student actually.
Yeah.
It's very short. Gap year, question mark. What does
Ah.
Paul think? Over to you. What do you think?
No, and it's a very, very good question, and I do get asked it a lot. Now, I guess I'm assuming here that we're talking between, obviously sixth form or FE, and then higher education. Would
Let's
that be, yeah?
let's
Okay.
let's take that as the context. Yeah.
Yeah, okay. So to throw that at sort of universities or employers, their take would be, okay, but what did you do with it? And again, if you take a gap year, there are a lot of positives. We talk a lot in the higher education world about burnout. I mentioned obviously working with medics who do 5 years. If you have done your, right up to year 11, then you do 2 years FE, and then you go straight into HE. It can be a long, long journey without much of a break. And often, I talked a little bit earlier about kind of taking that chance to reflect. A gap year is really good for that. If you take a gap year, there are an abundance of things you can do. Obviously, there are opportunities abroad, there are opportunities to work. I would be thinking about, if I was going to take a gap year, what am I looking to gain from it? And how can I use it to my advantage? So any experience you can get would be good. And I've known students who have particular interests where getting work experience is a little bit trickier. For example, clinical psychology is one of my areas at the minute. So there are some students who have maybe taken some time out and worked to get experience, skills, but then done networking and maybe shadowing or volunteering, and kind of really divided and partitioned their time up over that year in preparation for then higher education. So there are lots and lots of things you can do. So is a gap year a good idea? It might be a bit of a cop out, this, but I would say yes, as long as you make the most of it.
Very, very wise advice. Thank you very much, Paul. Now, obviously, the questions I've put to you have been from either my perspective or other teachers and students' perspectives. Is there anything that those questions didn't cover that you, as a professional careers consultant working in higher education, is there anything that those questions didn't cover? Or is there anything you wanted to say or advice you wanted to offer that those questions haven't allowed you or permitted you or opened it up for you to do? Is there anything you basically wanted to say that I haven't asked you about?
That's a very comprehensive set of questions. So
Oh, you're too kind.
there. I mean, certainly for again, as I said, I do kind of think a lot about what's going on in FE, having been there. And I think if I was going to reiterate one thing, it would be that it's so important for students to immerse themselves in the subjects they love. If I think about and reflect on the students that I have seen, over the last however long, there's this idea of kind of, I've chosen this because I thought it would get me a good job, and there's lots of jobs there, but actually they're not happy. They're not really, so they're not performing to the best of their abilities. And if you couple that in with the whole, graduate vacancies are open to all disciplines in most cases, I would see that as a real opportunity for students, particularly in FE, just to do what you love, start to develop that proactive mindset, talk to people, get experience, but knowing that you're not closing doors. You're only enhancing your CV, if you like.
Thank you very, very much, Paul. For someone, working at university in this field to give up their time so freely to come and talk to me and us today, that's really, really beneficial, and we can't thank you enough, Paul. So thank you. Paul, thank you very, very much indeed. Have a lovely day, afternoon and evening, and to you and the family and the community in Leicester, stay safe.
Thank you, Patrick. Thanks very much. Bye-bye.
All the best. Bye-bye.